I rode into Harlan's Ford on the last Tuesday of October with a split cinch, a lame horse, and the kind of quiet that follows a man who has lived alone on the same patch of ground for too long. The cattle were in. The grass was dry. And somewhere under my bunk in a tobacco box I had not opened in 3 years, there were 41 letters from a woman named Corey Vane. I know the number because I counted them that night. I had not counted them before. I had not done much of anything with them before, which is the whole of the story and the whole of my shame, and I might as well say so at the start. Her name was Corey Vane, and she had been the schoolteacher at Harlan's Ford from the spring of 1873 until the autumn of 1876, when the school board in Millhaven offered her a post with twice the students and a real building with glass in every window. I had known her 3 years. I had ridden past her schoolhouse every morning on my way to the south pasture and every evening on my way back, and for the first year I did not stop. For the second year I stopped twice. For the third year I stopped most mornings, tied my horse at the rail, and sat on the step while she graded papers with the door propped open, and we talked about things I cannot fully account for now. The way the light came off the Crail River in June, a book she was reading, whether the Hadley family's youngest boy was bright or only pretending. Small talk. The kind of talk that adds up to something large before you notice. I did not tell her that. I did not tell her much. That was my way. My first wife, Clara, had died in the winter of 1870, and something in me had gone narrow after that, not mean, I hope, but narrow like a creek after a dry summer. I could work. I could manage men. I could look at a stretch of country and know what it needed. But I could not say the thing that was in my chest when Corey Vane looked up from her papers and pushed her hair back and said, "You're quiet today, Callum." I would say I was tired. I was never tired. The morning she left for Millhaven, I was at the depot. I told myself I was there to ship 2 heifers. The heifers were already shipped. I stood at the far end of the platform with my hat in my hands, and I watched the driver load her trunk, and I watched her speak to the Hadley boy's mother, and I watched her turn and look at me across 20 feet of platform boards. She said, "I didn't think you'd come." I said, "I thought I'd see you off." She said, "Is that all?" I said, "I hope Millhaven suits you." She looked at me a long moment. She had gray eyes, Corey Vane, and she did not use them to perform anything. She only looked, steady and clear, and you knew she was seeing what was actually there. What was actually there in me that morning was a man with too many words stopped up behind his teeth and not enough courage to let one of them loose. She nodded once, she picked up her valise, she got on the stage. I walked back to my horse and rode home and told myself I had done the right thing, that a woman like Corey Vane did not need a cattle rancher with a narrow creek where his heart used to be, and that she would be better off in Millhaven. I told myself that for approximately 1 week before I stopped believing it. And then I went on living the same way anyway, because that is what a man does when he has confused stubbornness with dignity. The first letter came 6 weeks after she left. My name on the envelope in her schoolteacher hand, clean and exact, the letters neither showy nor cramped. I held it for a long time. I set it on the table. I read it 3 days later, alone at supper, and it said almost nothing. She had arrived safely, the schoolhouse was fine, the students were many and willing, she had seen an elk herd on the road in from the east that had made her think of the Crail River at dusk. She said she hoped the cattle had come through the first cold snap without trouble. She said she was glad she had known Harlan's Ford. She did not say she was glad she had known me. She did not need to. It was all through the letter like heat in a stone wall after the fire's gone out. I meant to write back. I had the paper. I had the ink. I sat down twice and got as far as her name at the top, and then I sat there looking at my own handwriting and felt the narrowness close over me like ice over a slow creek, and I got up and went back to work. The letter sat on the table until I moved it to the tobacco box under my bunk, and there it stayed. She wrote again in January. I read it the same week and did not answer. She wrote in March, April. The following October, which would have been 1877. twice in the spring of 1878. Every letter read and moved to the box and not answered, and every letter a small, careful, dignified reach across the distance I was keeping, and every silence on my end a door closed a little more firmly than the one before. I do not have a good explanation. I had bad ones at the time. I was busy. The winter had been hard. I would write when I had something worth saying. The truth is simpler and worse. I was afraid that if I wrote back she would answer, and if she answered, something would be required of me that I did not know how to give. So I gave nothing. And she, being Corey Vane, gave me the longest possible leash, 41 letters across 7 years before she finally stopped. The last letter in the box was dated September of 1882. 2 years before that October night when I sat down on the edge of my bunk and pulled the box out and looked at it. I do not know what made me open it that night. I had come in from a long day restringing fence along the North Creek, and I was tired in the way that goes below the muscles, and I sat on the bunk and the box was there, and I looked at it, and something shifted. The way a stone shifts at the bottom of a river when the current changes. Nothing dramatic, just a shift, and then the lid was off and the letters were in my hands. I read them in order, the date on each envelope oldest to newest, and I did not skip one. By the time I reached the letters from 1879, I had my elbows on my knees and my forehead in my hands. Not because she had said anything bitter. She had not once, not a word of blame or reproach in any of them. That was the thing that cut through me. A bitter letter I could have set aside. What she wrote instead was her life. The students who were coming along, the woman she boarded with who made a particular kind of apple cake, the winter the Crail River froze all the way across and she had walked out on it in the blue morning before anyone else was up. Small things. The kind of talk that adds up. And woven through it, always carefully, the thread she kept offering me, a question I could have answered, a door left open, not a demand. Corey Vane did not make demands. Just a small clear opening, letter after letter that I had let close, letter after letter without putting my hand out. The 1881 letters were shorter. I noticed that. The questions had stopped. She was still telling me about her life, but she was no longer asking about mine. That was the year she had stopped expecting me to come through the door and had simply started reporting, the way you report to yourself in a journal when there is no one else listening. The letter from September of 1882 was the shortest of all, 3 paragraphs. The students were well. The winter would be early, she could feel it. She had been offered a position at a school in Casper and was considering it. She hoped the cattle were healthy and the range was good. She did not say she hoped I was well. She had said it in every letter before that one. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I went to the window and looked out at the dark, and I thought about a woman who had written 41 letters across 7 years to a man who had answered none of them, and had not written one word of reproach, and had finally, quietly, with no ceremony, stopped. And I thought about what kind of woman that was, and what kind of man I had been, and what, if anything, was left to be done about it. I went to the depot the next morning before the hands were up. Eb Cutter was unlocking the freight office, and he looked at me sideways when I asked him about the stage schedules east. "East to where?" he said. "Millhaven to start, and then Casper if she went on." Eb scratched his jaw. "You asking about the outbound or the inbound?" "Outbound," I said. "When does the next one leave for Millhaven?" "Wednesday," he said. "But if your business is with the Vane woman, you might want to hurry." I looked at him. "She came through here 2 weeks ago," he said. "Stopped at the Hadley place for supper. Mrs. Hadley told my wife. She said Miss Vane was heading east, took the Casper job, sounds like. She's finishing out the term in Millhaven and then going on. Next stage east from Millhaven leaves the 3rd of November. He looked at his watch. "That's 11 days. I stood at that counter for a moment. Then I said, "What's the fastest road to Millhaven?" "Horseback," he said. 3 days if the Crail crossings are down. 4 if they're up." I went home and told my foreman, a steady man named Peavy, that he had the ranch for 2 weeks. I packed a bedroll and 4 days of food, and I saddled my best horse, a big gray I called Sutter, and I rode out of Harlan's Ford before noon. I will not make the ride more than it was. It was cold and it was long, and the trail crossings were partly up, which cost me half a day on the second morning. I slept 2 nights on the ground and 1 night in a way station where a German family had a hay barn and did not charge me. I thought, riding, about what I was going to say. I thought about it for 3 days, and by the time I rode into Millhaven in the gray early morning of the fourth day, I had not settled on anything. I knew what I felt. I did not know how to make it into words that would be worth the 7 years I had wasted. Millhaven was a town of some size, a main street with a hardware and a dry goods and a proper hotel, a courthouse with a flag that snapped in the November wind. I asked at the hotel where the schoolhouse was. A woman at the desk told me, and then she looked at me more carefully and said, "Are you from Harlan's Ford?" I said I was. She said Corey Vane mentioned she had come from there. "You'd want to go early. She opens the school at 7:30. I thanked her. I put Sutter in the livery and paid 2 days. I did not check in. I did not know if I would need a room or if I would be riding back to Harlan's Ford that afternoon, which seemed a reasonable possibility given what I had done, and not done for 7 years. The schoolhouse was at the north end of the street, a frame building with white paint going gray at the eaves and a bell above the door that had not yet been rung for the morning. I stood at the rail with Sutter's reins in my hand, and then I remembered I had left Sutter at the livery, so I stood at the rail with nothing in my hands, which felt about right. The door opened at 7:20. She had not changed in the way I had feared she might change, worn down, diminished by years of a solitary life in a frontier town. She was the same Corey Vane I had watched grade papers with the door propped open, the same straight back, the same gray eyes, the same way of looking at the world as though she intended to understand it thoroughly before she gave it her opinion. She was perhaps a little more certain of herself, the way a person gets when they have been doing something hard for a long time and have found out they are good at it. Her hair was up. She had a stack of copybooks under one arm. She stopped on the step and looked at me. I said I read the letters. She was quiet for a moment. The November wind came down the street and moved a strand of hair across her face, and she did not reach up to fix it. "All of them," she said. "All 41, I said, "in order." She looked at me steadily. "When?" "2 weeks ago," I said. "I rode out the morning after." She said nothing to that. She came down the 2 steps from the schoolhouse door and stood on the ground in front of me, the copybook still under her arm, close enough that I could see the color in her face from the cold morning air. "I'm leaving for Casper on the 3rd, she said. "The position there is a permanent one. I've already written to accept it." "I know," I said. "Eb Cutter told me that's why I rode." "In November," she said. "Yes. 3 days across the Crail country." "4," I said. "The crossings were partly up." She looked at me for a long moment. Not hard, not soft, the way she had always looked, steady and clear, seeing what was actually there. Then she said, "What is it you want to say, Callum? You've had 7 years to arrange it." I had, and standing there in the cold in front of her school, I found that the words were simpler than I had made them. I said I should have written back. I should have written back after the first letter, and I didn't, and I kept not writing until it became the thing I was instead of a thing I was doing. And I am sorry for it. Not because you needed my letters, you clearly got along without them, but because you wrote to me in good faith for 7 years and I gave you nothing back, and that was a cowardice I am ashamed of. She waited. She could see there was more. "I let Clara's death close me down," I said. "I told myself I was protecting you from a man who had nothing to give. The truth is I was protecting myself from finding out that I had something to give and might give it wrong." I looked at the ground and then back at her. "You never wrote a word of blame. That was the part that cut the worst. Any anger I could have answered, but you just kept writing, and then you stopped. And I sat with that box under my bunk for 2 years not opening it, and when I finally did, I understood what I'd thrown away. The wind came again, and this time she did reach up and fix her hair, tucking the strand back with one precise movement. "The Casper position is a good one," she said. "It's what I've been working toward." "I know," I said. "I'm not here to ask you to give it up." "Then what are you here to ask?" I thought about that. "I'm here to say the things I should have said at the Harlan's Ford Depot 8 years ago. You asked me if that was all, me being there to see you off, and I said yes. It wasn't all. I didn't have words for what else it was, or I didn't have the courage to use them, and I've carried that answer ever since." She was quiet. A pair of students came up the street behind me, 2 girls in wool coats, and they slipped past me with their eyes down, into the schoolhouse, and the door bumped shut behind them. "You've come a long way to say it," she said. "Not far enough," I said. "Not by a good distance." She looked at me a while longer. Then she said, "Come back at 4 o'clock. School lets out at 4. I'll have had the day to think, and you'll have had time to eat something. You look like you've been sleeping on the ground for 3 nights. 4, I said. 4 nights, she said. Go eat, come back at 4. I went to the hotel and got a room, and I ate a meal I could not tell you the contents of, and I cleaned up, and I sat in the room and looked at the wall and did not sleep, which was what I had done for most of 3 days of riding, and which at this point felt like my natural condition. At 3:30, I went back down the main street and stood again at the rail in front of the school. At 4 o'clock the bell rang and the children came out, a stream of them in wool and calico, loud with the relief of the ended school day. Corey stood in the door watching them go, and when the last one was down the steps she looked up and saw me and came down. She still had the copybooks. She set them on the step and stood with her hands free at her sides. I thought about what you said, she told me. I know. I thought about it for 8 years before today, she said, and I came to a conclusion, and then this morning I came to a different one. She looked at me straight. The Casper position is mine and I intend to take it. That's settled. All right, I said. But Casper is a day's ride from Harlan's Ford, she said, on a good horse. I was quiet. I have spent 7 years writing letters to a man who did not write back, she said. I am not going to spend the next 7 doing the same. If you mean to say something, Callum, say it. Not to explain the past. I heard you on the past this morning and it's accounted for. I mean what you mean going forward. I looked at her. Her gray eyes were steady and clear, and there was no performance in them, only the same precise attention she had always given to things she intended to understand. I said, I mean to write back, every letter. I mean to ride to Casper when the range allows, and I mean to write when it doesn't. I mean to be a man who says the thing that is in his chest, instead of a man who lets it stop up behind his teeth until the woman in question runs out of patience. I stopped. I tried again. I mean that I should have said 8 years ago that I did not want you to leave, and I want to say it now, for whatever it's worth. I know it's late. I know you've built something here and you're going to build something in Casper, and you don't need me for any of it. But I would like to be part of what you're building, if you'll have a man who is better at cattle and silence than at letters and words, and who is trying to learn the difference before it costs him any more. She stood with that for a moment. Then she said, the woman I board with makes an apple cake on Sundays. She has a big table and she's always had more chairs than guests. She picked up her copybooks. Casper in March if you can get away. Write me before then, I'll write back. She looked at me one more time, steady and clear. Don't make me wait again, Callum. No, I said, I won't. She went inside. The door closed. I stood at the rail in the cold November air of Millhaven with the flag snapping above the courthouse, and the light going out of the sky to the west over the Crail country I had ridden through, and something in me that had been narrow for a long time opened like a creek after rain, not all at once, not with any ceremony, just a slow and steady widening that I knew would not close again. I went back to the hotel and I asked for paper and a pen. I sat at the small desk by the window and I wrote the first letter I had written to Corey Vane, and it was not long and it was not fine, but it said what was in it. And in the morning I gave it to the post with my own hands before I saddled Sutter for the ride home. I had 41 letters to answer. I figured I had better get started. We married in Casper the following June on a Tuesday morning with the schoolhouse students as witnesses and a preacher who smelled of horses and spoke with great conviction. She did not give up her school. There was no question of that, and I would not have asked it. I brought 3 good horses to Casper and made a small arrangement with a rancher there who needed a hand on occasion. And for 2 years we kept 2 households, which was not ideal but was honest and was ours. In the spring of 1887, she came to Harlan's Ford for good. Not because I asked her to leave Casper, she had decided. The school there was well established and had 2 younger teachers who could carry it without her. She came because she wanted to, which is the only reason worth anything. She opened a school in Harlan's Ford the following September, 12 students the first year. By the time she stepped back from teaching, 20 years on, she had put half the county through its letters and numbers, and there were grown men and women in Harlan's Ford who still called her Miss Vane with a particular kind of respect that I recognized as the real kind. The kind you can't purchase or inherit, only earn. I kept the tobacco box. It lives on the shelf above my desk. The 41 letters are still in it, and there is a 42nd on top of them now, which is the one I wrote from the hotel in Millhaven and which she gave back to me on our wedding day, folded in its original envelope with a note pinned to it that said only, "Finally." I have been asked, more than once, what I would say to a younger man who was making the same mistake I made, holding back, going quiet, letting the silence grow until it had a weight to it that felt impossible to lift. I would say, lift it anyway. The weight is never as fixed as it feels, and the woman on the other side of the silence is not going to wait forever, nor should she. She has her own life to build, and she will build it with or without you, and the only question is whether you will be part of it or whether you will spend your days carrying a tobacco box you are afraid to open. Open the box, I would say, read the letters, then ride. Even in November, even across flooded crossings, even with nothing polished to say at the end of it. Ride,